That's the question for today's vote. Should all British police officers carry guns? Here's what you told us. 34% of you who voted said yes, and 66% said no. For the first time in British history, 2 women police officers lost their lives in a single incident in the line of duty, killed by a gun and grenade attack. They were unarmed. Currently, with the exception of Northern Ireland, the vast majority of police officers in the UK do not carry firearms. But do the officers themselves actually want to be armed? According to the most recent survey carried out in 2006 by the Police Federation, 4 out of 5 say no. But this survey preceded a spate of gun crime. In June 2010, Cumbrian taxi driver Derek Bird went on a shooting spree, killing 12 people. The following month, Raoul Moat shot and blinded PC David Rathband as he sat unarmed in his patrol car. Would the public feel safer with an armed police force? According to an ICM poll, 47% of us think so. Many in favour of arming the police say by carrying guns they can protect themselves against dangerous criminals, and it could serve as a deterrent against criminal behaviour. But critics, including Sir Hugh Orde, the current president of the Association of Chief Police Officers, say that carrying guns could actually put officers in more danger. Could it encourage hardened criminals to routinely carry firearms? Could it also break the covenant of policing by consent? And critics also claim that it could lead to fatal mistakes. In the US, many police officers and innocent civilians have been killed with police weapons. So should we resist a knee-jerk reaction that could exacerbate an already volatile situation? Or do we now have a duty to call for the protection of our protectors by arming all our police force? So, John, do we have a duty to routinely arm all police officers?
I think it's time that we actually did arm the police, routinely arm them. I think we need to drop this cliche of always comparing it to America as well. We're in Belfast today. The police here all carry guns. It works. Why don't we have it on the mainland as well?
Douglas Murray, John's saying that we shouldn't look to America, but it is interesting that they do routinely arm there. You don't think there's a case for going down that line?
I think it's always tempting at a time like this to go for an option like this. You know, everyone's still horrified by the tragedy earlier this week, and people want an answer to it. The thing is, you can never stamp out human wickedness entirely. You can never have a complete answer to it. And the same way you can't stamp out violence, much as we wish that no one ever carried a gun in our society. There will be people who will. The question then is, what do you do about that? My own view, my own experience of studying some of this is that it is a highly specific skill, having the skill to fire, particularly in very crowded areas, as our cities are, where the places where gun crime happens most often. And just to fall for the cliche of making the American comparison for a second, it's worth considering, just in the summer, people may remember that there was a shooting on Fifth Avenue in New York where a man shot his former colleague outside the Empire State Building. Now, 2 police who were armed, like most all New York police, pursued the man, and he took out the gun again. There was a firefight. Now, 9 members of the public were wounded, a number of them very severely and hospitalized. Now, none of them actually were wounded by the gunman. They were wounded by the 2 policemen who, in the middle of a crowded street, started firing off rounds. I don't think that's a happy situation, and I think it shows that there's a level of amateurism that enters this if it is not specific, if there are not just specific units, as we have in Britain, who are trained in the use of firearms.
Interesting. And I should say, we can't discuss the Manchester case in any detail because of, obviously, legal proceedings are active there. Mohammed, what do you make of this idea that you can train the police, but actually the moment you bring guns routinely into officers' lives, there's a danger of them being used in perhaps an amateurish way?
I think there's a more nuanced argument that we need to shine a light on here. There's clearly a strong case for arming the police. When you look at the estimates are there's somewhere in the region of between 1.5 and 2 million licensed guns on our streets. The estimates of unlicensed weapons, illegal arms on our streets, are varying anywhere between 200,000 at the minimum and 5 million at the outer level. So we know that there could be anywhere between 3, 4, 5 million guns reasonably on our streets. And increasingly we're seeing more and more weapons used in regular crimes. Yeah. So there is clearly a strong case for arming the police. However, one of the things I would say is that we have to look at what the police's track record has been. And I'm not somebody who's against the police. I'm a big fan of the police. They do great work. They've looked after me and my family personally on regular occasions. But when we look at cases like the de Menezes, when we look at the Duggan shooting, when we look at Hillsborough, which we're hearing about recently, any number of situations, the Forest Gate shooting, is our police force ready, and are they able, and is it appropriate for them to hold firearms?
This is why it shouldn't be a knee-jerk. This debate shouldn't just happen when there's been a terrible incident like there has been in Manchester. There's need for a reasoned debate, and it should have happened years ago. We shouldn't just be comparing ourselves to America. We need to look at what happens here in Northern Ireland, which last time I looked is part of the United Kingdom. People routinely carry it here. No one cares about it. It works. We shouldn't always compare ourselves to America. And at the same time, there's a need, obviously, at the moment for a big debate about police reform. But the very people we never asked this question to are the police. There was a survey where 7 out of 10 police officers said they didn't want to be routinely armed several years ago. That debate needs to happen again. But we also need to look at the criminal justice system. The reason why there's 5 million guns on the street, Mohammed, is because there is not enough punishment and severe punishment for people who carry, sell or possess these guns. So the whole structure needs looking at, and then our police need to be given the necessary resources. If they don't want to be armed, fine. My personal belief is they'd be better if they're armed, but I want a proper debate. But what we need to do is stop the revolving door where people go into the courts, and if they do go to prison, they're out again too quickly, and they're on our streets. The criminals have already tooled up. This idea that if we give the police guns, the criminals will have more guns is nonsense. You don't think it would encourage criminals to carry them more routinely than they do? It's already happening. Okay. It's already happening. The Daily Mirror this week showed how you can go and hire a gun in Manchester like that, as if you were just buying a Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's already moved on. We just haven't moved the debate on, and politicians haven't been brave enough to have the debate. I want to get some police perspective on this, and I'm pleased to say that Darren Rathband, who's a serving police officer in Australia, joins us via webcam. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. And of course, it was your late brother, PC David Rathband, who lost his sight after being shot by Raoul Moat. I understand that Australian police officers routinely carry guns. What's your view on the idea of doing that? Has it put up a barrier between you and the public at all?
I certainly haven't experienced that since I came to Australia. The communities of Great Britain are not blind to the fact that police officers are seriously injured and killed in what's becoming a more frequent occurrence. The Dixon Dock Green approach to policing in the 21st century is outdated, it's ill-informed, and has fatal consequences not only for the police but for the public that those police are there to protect. The experience I've had here in Australia is that the public feel positive towards us. There doesn't appear to be the reticence for the general public to approach an officer, even though we've got a sidearm. It's, in my opinion, the public expect protection and the security offered by an officer who is armed and able to respond effectively.
If I may ask,
I've certainly noticed the criminal element certainly think twice about confrontation, but the use of the firearms here is extremely rare. That's interesting. I mean, we all have such sympathy for what happened to your family and your loss of your brother, but one can't help wondering in some of these cases which promote the discussion whether it would have made any difference if your brother had been carrying a weapon, if they're being either lured into a situation or people are sneaking up on them with weapons. Would it have made a difference to your brother, do you think, if he'd carried a gun? When my brother was shot, he was undertaking what was classed as a normal night shift on traffic. The sort of phrase routine job has certainly been mentioned. Would a firearm have saved him? Maybe not, but it may have certainly given that deterrent to the person who crept up on him and shot him and gave him the catastrophic injuries that David sustained as a direct result of being shot with an unlicensed illegal firearm. Thank you. Thank you. It isn't always the gun that kills police. More officers are killed by the use of screwdrivers and knives. They need to be given the ability to protect themselves. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Rathband. I also want to bring in Andy Redhead, who's a former firearms officer for the police here. Andy Redhead, you'd have heard what Darren Rathband said. He feels it's important that police officers are given the access to weapons to defend themselves. Many families like that say it's time. Do you not think they're right? Officers think it's right now?
Good morning. I can understand exactly where family members come from on every occasion that an officer loses their lives in a situation where a firearm is involved and used against them. I think we have to respect, I think there's several things actually. I think debate is good and healthy and perhaps timely. However, we have to respect the fact that the latest poll suggests that 4 out of 5, over 80% of police officers, do not wish to be armed in the UK. That has to be respected.
But that was some years ago, before the recent spate of shootings.
Absolutely, and the new poll and recent shootings and all the rest of it. However, I suspect that figure will not be massively adjusted because of recent events. We have to ask and think on various things. Firstly, how many experienced police officers, etc., would choose to leave service if it was forced upon them to carry a firearm? And how many years would it take to recover that expertise in the various specific specialist roles if someone chose to walk away because they didn't want to carry a gun? Secondly, firearms is a skill set like anything else in the police service, and in the last 3 decades the police service have had to learn new skills. It's a skill set. If we wanted to routinely arm our officers, not everybody would be competent and proficient after training to be signed off as qualified.
Okay.
And one weapon is one set of training. So firearms officers, myself when I was in service, carried several firearms, and there's different skill sets and use of those firearms.
Okay, let's get some...
The ability to then ramp up 100,000 plus police officers into firearms qualification would take years.
Okay.
Yes, there's a debate, but it's not something that could happen overnight.
All right, thank you.
It would take a long time to do.
Thank you so much. I mean, if you set aside the practicalities of how long it would take and the budget for it, there's an interesting argument there about whether many officers would really want to do this. And do you accept that, John?
No, I do accept that, and that's why I'm saying that what needs to happen is the police need to be consulted. There's a massive reform programme going through at the moment. 16,000 police officers are going to be got rid of by this coalition. Is the debate happening in the public about that? What kind of police force do we want? We're going to get police and crime commissioners, aren't we? Very, very soon. Will that bring more accountability?
But we have to
the police have to be accountable to the community, but the police must be involved in these discussions.
Right.
And I feel too often they're not.
But we have to recognise some of the realities. I'm not sure it's an accurate thing to compare Britain to the US, but what maybe we should compare to is other European countries. Yeah. And in 2003 there was a study done between some of the Nordic countries, between Norway and Sweden, which have very similar social circumstances. And in Norway they don't arm the police, in Sweden they do arm the police, and funnily enough there were significantly more shootings by police officers of criminals and suspects in Sweden. So when you routinely arm the police, you do see a massive upspike in use of that firearm, and they turn to it more often.
Well, and what do you think, Douglas? I'm struck by the fact that, of course, Norway's had one of the worst mass shootings in history, and in a way there's no direct connection between officers carrying guns and terrible extreme crimes like this.
No, as I say, I mean, you can't stop human evil, you can't stop human wickedness. So everything in this discussion has to be how you limit the suffering, how you limit crime. And one of the things, as I sort of mentioned earlier, is that there is this terrible tendency in this country, I mean in every country, but that when something terrible happens, you have an immediate reaction of the way to sort it out. The fact is that in this situation we have in Britain, it's about things at every step of the way. It's about the criminal justice system working better. It's about building prisons to imprison people who do this. We can't send people to prison when they have guns quite often because people say there aren't enough places. Build more prisons. All
right. I want to bring in Jenny Jones as well here, who stood for London Mayor for the Green Party and is very well known as Deputy Chair of the London Assembly's Police and Crime Committee. I wonder what your view is in this debate, particularly in the light of some of these terrible public order issues where the police have committed errors, whether it's the riots or other situations. What do you think of the idea of adding guns into that mix?
I think it would be an absolutely disastrous idea. Although we can't compare exactly the same to the States, in a 10-year period, 500 police officers were killed on duty. 10% of them had their own guns turned against them. So if you add another 150,000 guns to the streets routinely, you are going to have less safety. That's less safety for everybody, police officers included.
John, you disagree. Why?
That's absolute nonsense, because you can take that round the other way. When they flooded the streets of New York and had a zero-tolerance policy, crime went down, didn't it? So, this is nonsense.
This is why Douglas... graffiti. That wasn't all about carrying guns.
No, it wasn't all about carrying guns, but they did carry guns. But it was about having a more visible police presence, which goes back to what Douglas is saying. We need a proper, holistic debate about this. We need to involve the police in this. I mean, you're highlighting, in typical BBC fashion, if you don't mind me saying, that somehow the police are gun-toting gangsters. And yes, there have been some terrible incidents.
No, we're not saying that at all.
You suggested during the riots. I don't
No. Well, the issue was that there are issues where the policing tactics
Yes.
are sometimes criticised.
Of course,
And what will be the situation with guns in that?
There'll be dreadful mistakes, but that isn't a reason for not having the grown-up debate.
Okay.
And we shouldn't be having the debate now after these tragic killings. What we should have been having is ages ago. We need to involve the police in this. We need to involve the general public in it. And I certainly think at this moment in time, when we've got gun-toting gangsters on our streets and over 5 million weapons, one thing for sure we shouldn't be doing is cutting the British police force by 16,000 people. That's the real debate.
You don't think it would add to the stress of police officers to routinely arm them when you could just bring in these specialist units in these really difficult situations?
I don't think the issue is whether or not you add to the stress of police officers. It's about whether or not the police are able to police effectively.
Yeah.
The fact is, in this country, we are very reactive about this at the moment. You know, there is seen to be a police overreaction on something, or there is a police overreaction. Suddenly, everybody says the police are, need to be pulled off. Then the police are pulled off, and then, as we saw a couple of years ago in student protests, they go in and smash up a building. Everyone says, "Where were the police?"
Yeah.
It can't keep on being this weird.
Okay. And if the police step out of line, like for example the Hillsborough allegations, then the police should be put before the courts, just like senior politicians should be as well.
I think
but this idea that all police as a result of this are baddies, or because of the killing of the Brazilian.
I think there's one important.
Very briefly, last word to you, Mohammed.
There's very little evidence to show that permanently arming the police force will reduce gun crime or serious crime in this country. However, there is sufficient evidence to show that targeted use and temporary measures of gun crime can reduce tensions and elevate crime.
Thank you. I want to very briefly get in a couple of comments. One from a serving police officer. Punishments need to be harder and tougher in the first place to deter criminals. That's what you were saying, John. Protection by the courts is what we need instead of carrying guns. Andy, another police officer. I think carrying a firearm would create a barrier between police and the public in this country. But thank you all very much for that. We have to end it there because your text and online poll votes are in, and we asked, should all British police officers carry guns? And here's what you told us. 34% of you who voted said yes, and 66% said no. I mean, it's interesting, John. You know, it perhaps wasn't the result that one might have expected, with an overwhelming response in favour. What are your thoughts on?
No, I think that's fine. I mean, I think it's good that you're having the debate. I just want us to have the wider debate in society, and it shouldn't just be after tragic events. And I think we need a wider debate about the whole criminal justice system and the way we want our police to police in this country. And as I say, that's the debate that should be having at the moment. We're not, we've got these allegations against this minister about what he said or didn't say to serving police officers.
This is Andrew Mitchell's alleged insults to the police officers at Downing Street.
Do we hold our police in enough esteem? Well, I think the general public do. I think perhaps this coalition isn't at the moment in the way they're treating them. So I say, ask the police, get the police involved, and let's have a police force that is fit and proper for the 21st century. And I certainly don't think we should be cutting it.
But Marilyn, it's interesting, isn't it, the question about respect for the police in our society by our leaders as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. The police do a phenomenal job. I don't think they should be armed.
Mohammed?
I think it's the very sensible and fair and reasonable British public saying what we think is what they probably would say. And we need to consult with the police. We need to have a grown-up debate about this. I agree entirely with what's been said. I don't think I would have expected a society which in the 1800s decided that we want an unarmed police to police by consent would change that much over some really tragic events. And I think the British public have spoken.
It's very interesting in the light of some very serious, concerns about the police. But very briefly, give us a sentence.
Well, the danger about policing by consent is that will disappear. If we cut the police, we'll go more to a paramilitary style, and that'll be bad for British police.
Thank you. That's a very, very big concern. I know Brian Paddick mentioned it last year, just after the riots. Thank you all very much.